Hi everyone, my name is Jenny and I'm back today to do another video. Today I'm going to be chatting through my thoughts slash a reaction on the Women's Prize 2021 long list. I meant to film this video a couple days ago, but honestly I just haven't really had the time. My weekend this past weekend was pretty busy, and then today I just happened to have like the day off early from work, so I thought now would be a good time to film it. But as I said, I wanted to kind of go over my thoughts on the Women's Prize long list, as I was intrigued, I think as a lot of other people were. I have never really considered myself a super like literary prize oriented reader or just kind of person in general. However, if there was a prize that I think most aligns with my reading taste, it's definitely the Women's Prize. Although they do lean more towards some of the like commercial fiction that I don't find quite as engaging, particularly given that it's a British prize, and so the commercial fiction is pretty much always set in Britain as opposed to the US, which is where I prefer my commercial fiction to be set if I'm reading it. But other than that, I do enjoy a lot of the literary fiction that gets longlisted and shortlisted for the prize. I also want to mention that I don't have any specific plans to like read the long list by any means, or really even read the short list. I maybe, if the books that I most want to see on the short list end up there, I may read some of the ones that I'm already interested in, but I don't think I'm going to go out of my way to read the short list unless it's just the books that I'm super excited about and was kind of planning on reading anyway. I will also just mention now that I'm not planning on going into depth about what any of these books are about, as I assume if you have clicked on this video, you probably have already watched several other people going over the Women's Prize long list, and many of those people include a synopsis. So if you by chance do not know what these books are about, I will definitely put a link to the Women's Prize down in the description box below, and you can check out like the brief synopses that they've given of each book. But this is really just gonna be like my thoughts on the book in general, and less so like what the book's about. So without further ado, let's just kind of get into things. I've broken them into three groups of books that I've never heard of before, books that I had heard of, and books that I've read, of which there are some in each category. So starting with the three books that I haven't heard of and have no interest really in reading, we have Because of You by Dawn French. I'm gonna be honest, and this may be because I'm not super involved in British pop culture particularly, but just kind of pop culture in general is somewhat lost on me. I have no idea who Dawn French is. Like, everyone is talking about like, oh yeah, Dawn French, and I'm like, I genuinely had to look up who she was. I watched some of her comedy sketches. I didn't really like any of them. Maybe she had some more British humor. I know British and American humor do kind of differ in some ways, but I didn't particularly love her or find it very funny. And so the fact that she's written this book that I think a lot of the people that I follow are already not that excited about is definitely a reason that I'm not excited about this one as well. Same goes for Nothing But Blue Sky by Kathleen McMahon. Maybe is I think how you say her name. This one again seems kind of a bit more on the commercial side of things, not one that I'm super interested in. And then finally The Golden Rule by Amanda Craig is another one I really have no interest in reading, and all three of those books are conveniently or maybe uncoincidentally not available here in the United States. None of these three authors have broken into the US publishing market, so I am not surprised that I've not really heard anything about them. And from my like very limited research, it doesn't seem like any of these three books have been picked up by a US publisher, at least because I can't find them on Amazon, which usually most books that are published here in the US you can at least find on Amazon even if they're not yet available. Then there were also two other books that I'd never heard of before, but I am now more intrigued about them. The first of those is Consent by Annabelle Lyon, which I heard Matthew Sharapa talk about in his Women's Prize reaction, which I'll put a link to down in the description box below. And he really raved about this book. Granted, he said that he was involved in this book in his role in the publishing industry, but it sounds really interesting. I am intrigued about the ideas of sisters and also a kind of more thriller-esque plot while still being in the literary fiction category, so I think this one is one that I would be intrigued to check out. The same is also true for Small Pleasures by Claire Chambers, which is another one that I was kind of on the fence about, but I just watched today Mercedes from Mercy's Bookish Musings video on the Women's Prize, which I will also put a link to down in the description box below, and she said that she really loved this one, so I'm excited to get to this one as well. Unfortunately, it doesn't come out here in the US until October, so it'll be a while, but eventually I am hoping to get my hands on a copy of this one because I think this will either be a book that I really love. It is blurbous and Patchett-esque, which I think could go one of two ways, but also I'm kind of intrigued about the like Immaculate Conception ideas that I've seen some people talk about with this book. Then moving into kind of the bulk of the Women's Prize long list, which are books that I've heard of but not made a ton of effort to read or are not super high on my priority list. The first of those is Burnt Sugar by Afni Doshi. This is one obviously that I heard talked a lot about in the like Booker Prize circle of the booktube community because it was shortlisted for the Booker Prize this past year, and I'm intrigued about this one. I do want to tread carefully because it's about a toxic mother-daughter relationship, and it's apparently also just like super bleak and depressing, and there's not any kind of lightness to cut through the tension of this book, which doesn't really sound like the type of book that I'd be interested in. But I've heard other people talk really positively about it in terms of like a piece of literary fiction. So I'm intrigued about this one, not super eager to get to it, to be honest, but I would not be surprised to see it on the shortlist. Additionally, we also have Detransition Baby by Tori Peters, another one that I've been seeing a lot, particularly in like the last week or so. And this is another one that I'm intrigued about, might get to someday. I feel like this would be a book that potentially my like fellow book club buddies and I would be interested in reading together. I have heard it kind of veers at times into a more manifesto-y type novel, which are also usually not my favorite. I much prefer the thematic explorations of a novel to be a bit more subtle and less so kind of in your face, and I have heard that this book kind of ventures there, but it's making some really important points, and so I would kind of have to read it and see if it's the type of book that I would enjoy. But again, another one that I'm like very excited that it made the long list in general. I believe Tori Peters is the first trans author to have made the Women's Prize in any capacity. I do know last year Okweke Mese was nominated, I think, but Okweke Mese is non-binary, and so there was some drama surrounding the Women's Prize there and some elements of like misgendering Mese, so I'm excited to see that there's progress being made in terms of Tori Peters being a trans female author and being recognized by the Women's Prize. So there is that one. I will potentially get to it at some point, especially again if I'm hearing really good reviews about it from people that I trust here on BookTube or in real life. I definitely will give it a shot, but this is another one that's not super high on my priority list right now. Then How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House by Sherry Jones is another one that I'm somewhat intrigued about. I don't know a ton about this one, but it seems like one that I might like, but I'm not super eager to pick it up right away. I don't know a ton of people who have read this one, and again, I'm not sure that this one is available in the United States, or maybe it just came out in the US. So I don't have a ton of like backing of kind of what the general vibe of this one is, but I have heard a few people kind of mention it in passing, probably mostly in like book hauls and less so in like wrap-ups and stuff, just because I really don't feel like I know that much about it. But again, one that I'm kind of intrigued about. If the reviews are positive, I will pick it up, but I'm not super eager to get to it. And then No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood is one that I have very complicated feelings about because I don't really want to read it. I mean, it sounds intriguing to me, but at the same time, I am someone who really doesn't like the internet, and I feel like it's a very oxymoronic thing to say in a video that I'm putting on the internet on a social media platform, but I hate social media. Aside from like watching booktube videos, I don't really go on social media, and also stalking people on LinkedIn. I do love LinkedIn as a social media platform, and Goodreads. But aside from those three, like YouTube, LinkedIn, and Goodreads, I don't go on any of the other big ones really. I go on Facebook periodically to look at and judge people who are having like COVID-19 weddings. I do have an Instagram, and I post there like once every 6 to 8 months. And then I got off Twitter for good probably about a year ago, although I'd left like several times previous to that. And I believe that No One Is Talking About This is specifically a kind of ode, but also a critique of Twitter and Twitter culture. And honestly, Twitter is the worst one, the worst offender in my eyes. I really think it's a terrible place for all people to be. I know a lot of people love it, so I don't want to offend anyone who does genuinely love Twitter, but I just think it's a terrible website that is destroying everything. So I don't really want to read a book about it, although I do think that internet culture and people's obsession with the internet is something that is intriguing. And I do know from just what I've seen of preliminary reviews about this one that it is kind of critiquing this idea of people who believe that their internet life is like just as important as their real life, because the main character in this book like has something that happens in her real life that she realizes the internet actually like can't at all be a part of. So I don't know, I will have to kind of see what other people are saying about this one, particularly people who maybe have similar thoughts on me in terms of like internet culture and their attitudes towards it, because so far I've only seen other people like in my real life who I know really engage with Twitter and social media, and less so people who I don't think of as active on social media, if that makes sense. In short, don't think I'm going to read this one. Then the same is also true for Piranesi by Susanna Clark. I just don't really think this one is for me. I've heard from the reviews that I've seen of like people that I follow here on BookTube, it seems like one that I think other people would engage with more than I would. However, if I continue to see good reviews, and it is so short that I may eventually get to this one, particularly if it ends up on the shortlist or something, I might be just intrigued enough to like listen to it quickly as an audiobook or something. But there's nothing about the plot of this one or the kind of themes that I've heard that it's exploring that really engages me all that much. And then Summer by Ali Smith. I am definitely intrigued to try Ali Smith as an author. I've never read her before, but Summer obviously does not seem like the appropriate starting place. If anything, Autumn is likely where I would start with her, although I'm also intrigued about How to Be Both by Ali Smith. So if you have any recommendations for where to start with Ali Smith, do let me know down in the comment section below. But obviously Summer does not seem to be the place, so I have no plans of reading this one until, if I enjoy the seasonal quartet, I get to this one in that series. And then finally, the last one that I'd heard of but not yet read was Unsettled Ground by Claire Fuller. Claire Fuller is an author that I've been wanting to check out for a while. She has several books, all of which have plots that sound intriguing to me, at least intriguing enough that I've definitely wanted to check her out, but she's never been like a super high priority author for me, particularly because she's not super well known here in the States. But this one is coming out in May from Tin House here in the US, and I have actually requested an early copy of it. So if I get approved, I definitely will be reading this one in the near future and would probably be the next one I would read. But I'm intrigued about this one. The plot is not like super screaming to me a me book, but someone that I was watching, because I've watched a lot of these Women's Prize Longlist videos by now, was mentioning that it's very atmospheric writing about this cottage and the family and the sibling dynamics, and I feel like those are all kind of buzzwords for me. So I could definitely see Unsettled Ground being the next one I read from the long list. And then moving into the 4 books from the long list that I have already read, all of which I enjoyed, and all 4 of these I'm not super surprised made the long list, as I think they are all books that have a fairly wide-reaching audience appeal and also are books that are kind of speaking to different issues of our time. But the one that I probably enjoyed the least, which is actually surprising because I think it's the one I initially rated the highest, but looking back is the one that I feel the least kind of engaged and connected to, is The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. Obviously I feel like this was probably one of the biggest books of last year, and so I'm really not surprised to see it on the Women's Prize long list. I read this, I enjoyed it last summer when the kind of hype around it was at its peak, and I definitely feel like that impacted my reading experience, because thinking back on this one, same with The Mothers, which I've also read, I don't feel particularly connected to the story or the kind of larger themes that it was talking about. There are definitely other stories about racism and colorism in America that I feel like have stuck with me better than this one did. However, I'm definitely not surprised to see it, as I've said previously, on the long list, because this one has a lot of, I think, kind of more commercial fiction-y reader appeal, despite the fact that it probably is literary fiction, although honestly I would maybe call it very literary commercial fiction, just because it is very readable and it's touching on themes but in a very kind of approachable book clubby way. So I am not surprised to see this one. Honestly, would be pretty surprised to not see it on the shortlist, but there's other books that I kind of prefer to be on the shortlist, so like take of that what you will. Transcendent Kingdom by Yael Jossi, which I actually just read at the beginning of this year, and I enjoyed this one. I definitely enjoyed Homegoing more, and I've seen some discussion about whether Transcendent Kingdom was put on the list in part because Homegoing was not put on the list during its year, and Homegoing, since its release in like 2017 I want to say, has really reached so much like critical acclaim despite being a debut novel that the Women's Prize perhaps like wanted to honor Yael Jossi in some way, which I think is definitely possible. I mean, I definitely did not find Transcendent Kingdom to be as engaging as Homegoing was, but I also think there's a lot of readers here that engage even more critically and deeply with Transcendent Kingdom than they do Homegoing. So it's an interesting dichotomy. I definitely think Yael Jossi's a talented writer and she should be recognized by like more literary prizes because she's just amazing, and I can't wait to see where her career takes off. I would definitely recommend it if you have not yet read it, just because I love Yael Jossi, and I'm again not surprised to see it on the list because I think she is a very talented writer, and an okay book from Yael Jossi is still a pretty good book. But I just don't feel like this is perhaps the best book of hers even so far, or potentially in the future, to be on a literary prize long list, if that makes any sense. Then the next book I actually read as an early copy way back in June of 2020, which is Exciting Times by Nisha Dolan, and I was really pleased to see this one on the list. I thoroughly enjoyed this. It definitely does have a lot of Sally Rooney here, and I do think that there is some kind of people are getting tired of Sally Rooney, which is sad for me because I do think she's genuinely a very talented person, and I think that a lot of people have experienced her and read her work through a kind of commercial fiction-y lens, which I don't think does her work justice, if that makes any sense, but I do think is possible. There's some literary fiction out there that you can read and kind of get the base level and still enjoy it but not maybe get as much out of it, and then there's kind of reading it as a more literary experience and perhaps getting more. No shade to anyone who doesn't like Sally Rooney, I can understand the critiques, but I do feel like that, especially with the TV show, is something that potentially has happened with Sally Rooney. But anyway, back to Exciting Times. I thoroughly enjoyed this one. I think it's bringing up a lot of interesting discussions, particularly discussions that I feel, just from my very outsider experience of British culture and kind of the dialogue surrounding colonialism and capitalism. I think this book is making a lot of points that are apt and that are very important to the kind of political discussion happening in Britain right now about Britain's role as a colonial power and the impact that that has had both internationally in Hong Kong but also as locally as Ireland. I think this book is making a lot of interesting points about that and about kind of Britishness in the global world more broadly that I thoroughly appreciated. And yeah, I just enjoyed this one. I also thought it was a fun book to read, and so I was pleased to see it on the long list. I don't know if this one will make it on the short list because I think of the kind of more millennial fiction books on the list, I don't think this one's the strongest. In fact, we'll get to my like top pick as it stands right now in just a minute. So I would be kind of surprised to see this on the short list, but definitely pleased because I did really enjoy this one, and it was one of my favorite books of the year this past year in 2020, which I'll put a link to my like favorite books video up in the cards above in case you are new to my channel and did not see that. So there's that one. And then last but not least, another one of my favorite books of last year that I'm so happy made it onto the list because I think this author deserves a lot more recognition, and I'm really excited to see prizes kind of take her on to help her kind of boost her career, and that's Luster by Raven Leilani. This one is another kind of great addition to the like millennial fiction canon and is kind of pinpointing a lot of very specific points to the Black female experience in America and how that impacts the kind of greater discussion surrounding millennial fiction of not really knowing what you're doing with your life and being financially unstable. Like, I feel like the Black female lens that Raven Leilani is able to put into our main character in Edie through this book in discussing those issues and giving them more context for non-like white upper middle class people, I think is super important and definitely something that I really enjoyed about this novel. I also found it a really fun novel. It's kind of sensational at times, which did bother me occasionally, but overall I thought it was really kind of engaging. I loved Raven Leilani's very visceral writing style, and I'm super excited to see kind of where her career takes her, and so that also makes me extra excited about her being on a long list like this. And honestly, I feel like this is currently my pick to like win it all, although I'm not entirely sure that will happen because I really don't know much about these literary prizes. But that also kind of transitioned us nicely to my like prediction slash wish list for the shortlist. So from what I've garnered from other people talking about their shortlists, it seems to be 6 books that get put on the shortlist. So I've picked 6-ish. I think I have a couple that like I'm like maybe this book or maybe this book, but this is one that I would definitely love to see on the shortlist, and I definitely think it deserves a place there. I think it is doing something that many of the other books are trying to do, and it's taking a lot of those different books like The Vanity Calf, like Exciting Times, like No One Is Talking About This, and kind of does it all in one book, which I appreciate. So this is definitely my like kind of top pick for the shortlist. I also would not be surprised to see Transcendent Kingdom on the shortlist. I think this is doing something similar to Luster in that it's bringing up a lot of thematic elements that are true in some of the other books, but bringing them all together into one book. Additionally, this book also touches on the immigrant experience, which unlike Luster, which does feel very American to me, I feel like Transcendent Kingdom could have a bit more of an international reach because of its discussion about immigration and feeling like an outsider that I think people can kind of relate to and think about in complex ways a bit more easily than perhaps the like Black American experience that is touched upon in The Vanishing Half and in Luster. So that's my pick number 2. And then my pick number 3 is Detransition Baby, just because I do feel like this is very novel in terms of Torrey Peters as an author for the Women's Prize, and so I feel like they would really be remiss to not include Detransition Baby on the shortlist. However, as I mentioned previously, I've not read this one, so I don't know if it's good or not, but I feel like it will probably be on the shortlist. The same goes for Burnt Sugar by Afni Doshi, just because I think this is another one that's gotten a lot of literary acclaim. It's written by an Indian author. It is discussing a lot of topics that are related to, I don't want to call them women's issues, but like related to feminism and motherhood and the complexities of those relationships, that I think is something that the Women's Prize seems to enjoy. So again, another one that I would not be surprised to see. Then the next book that I'm pretty sure will likely make the shortlist is The Vanishing Half by Burt Bennett, just because this one has gotten so much buzz around it, and I feel like, again, they'd be remiss to not include it, because this is definitely one of the most like read books of the long list, and so I feel like a lot of people would be disappointed to not see it on there. But again, that may also be a reason to not include it, to kind of showcase other authors. So I'm putting this one on my shortlist prediction, but TBH, in my personal opinion, I'd be kind of happy if a different book took its place, but I don't know what that book would be because I've not read enough of the other books. So this is my prediction for now. Maybe that'll change as we get closer to the announcement of the shortlist. And then my last space, I have 2 different books, just I'm not sure which direction they will want to take this. So my last pick could either be No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. I feel like this one is touching on a very like now topic, and that is something that prizes seem to usually enjoy, is kind of connecting with the here and now. And definitely the internet, especially after a year of lockdown, is a place that people are spending a lot of their time, and it's a place that's getting a lot of kind of critical discussion surrounding it. And so I feel like this is one that I would definitely not be surprised to see on the shortlist. However, I'd also love to see Exciting Times by Nisha Dolan, which I feel like is doing similar things, except taking a different approach to discussing topics of the now by including this kind of more historical lens of the history of colonialism, capitalism, and how that's relating to the now and the lives of like young people today. So that is my other kind of pick for that last spot. And that will wrap up this Women's Prize long list reaction / musings video. If you're new to my channel, I'd love to have you stick around and subscribe. I make new videos about once a week about the books I'm reading, obviously, and also some fun vlog content usually. I'll put a link to my most recent vlog if you're new to the channel and want to check it out. Additionally, I'd love to hear any of your thoughts on any of the books that are on the long list. What are ones that you're most excited to read, or what are ones that you have read and you most recommend? I'd love any of that information down in the comment section below. And I think that's everything. I hope you're having a great rest of your day whenever you watch this, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.